It began with a silence, a strange, almost eerie calm that settled over the South Atlantic on the morning of May 2nd, 1982. The sky was low and gray, stretching out over a restless sea. Aboard the Argentine cruiser ARA General Belgrano, 1,093 men moved through their routines. Some manned the radar, some lounged in bunks, others sipped mate or played cards. For most, the mood was light. There were jokes, laughter, a shared belief that despite the tension in the air, they weren't in danger. They were outside the declared exclusion zone, they weren't looking for a fight, and they had no idea what was coming. Far beneath the waves, hidden deep in the cold silence of the ocean, another ship was watching. HMS Conqueror, a British nuclear-powered submarine, had been tracking the Belgrano for hours. Her orders were specific. The British War Cabinet had debated them fiercely. And now, in the dark stillness of the submarine's control room, the command had been given. Engage. At 15:57 local time, 3 torpedoes tore through the ocean. 2 struck their target, and within minutes, the Belgrano, one of the most powerful warships in the Argentine Navy, was mortally wounded. The men aboard didn't hear the torpedoes coming. Just a sudden, violent roar. A thunderclap that split the steel beneath their feet. Lights went out. Fire and smoke raced through the corridors. The deck buckled. Men were thrown through the air. Others never moved again. The Belgrano was dying. And so were hundreds of her crew. To understand how the Belgrano ended up in the crosshairs, we have to go back just a few weeks. In early April 1982, Argentine forces invaded the Falkland Islands, known in Argentina as the Islas Malvinas. The islands had been a British territory for nearly 150 years, but Argentina had long claimed them as its own. The invasion was swift. British forces were overwhelmed. The Argentine flag was raised. In London, Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher faced a storm of criticism. The loss of the Falklands was seen as a national humiliation. But instead of accepting it, the British government chose to act. A massive naval task force was assembled and sent south, 8,000 miles from home, to take the islands back. The stage was set for war. Both nations claimed moral authority. Both believed the islands were rightfully theirs. But the conflict that followed would be brutal, swift, and deeply controversial. And the Belgrano would become its most infamous casualty. The ARA General Belgrano was no ordinary ship. Built during World War II as the USS Phoenix, she had survived the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. After the war, she was sold to Argentina, renamed, and modernized. By 1982, she was a key part of Argentina's naval power, armed with 15 guns and over 1,000 men. On May 1st, the British launched airstrikes on Port Stanley, the Falklands capital. In response, the Argentine Navy began deploying its fleet. The Belgrano, accompanied by 2 destroyers, was sent south of the islands to patrol. But their position, just outside the British-declared 200 nautical mile exclusion zone, was a source of legal and ethical ambiguity. By traditional rules of engagement, the Belgrano was off-limits. But war rarely plays by rules. HMS Conqueror had been shadowing the Belgrano for days. Built for Cold War stealth, the submarine was invisible beneath the waves. Her captain, Commander Chris Reeford Brown, had orders to monitor, but not to fire, unless directly authorized by London. That authorization came after intense debate. Thatcher's War Cabinet, fearing the Belgrano might turn and strike the British fleet, gave the go-ahead. The order was controversial. The Belgrano was outside the exclusion zone, and satellite intelligence suggested it was sailing away from the conflict zone, not toward it. But the British believed that waiting too long could allow the Argentine Navy to encircle them. So they struck. The torpedoes hit with devastating effect. One exploded near the bow, the other hit near the engine room, causing massive flooding. The second strike sealed the ship's fate. Power failed. Communications went dark. Emergency bulkheads jammed. Within 20 minutes, the Belgrano was listing heavily. In those moments, chaos reigned. Some sailors ran for lifeboats. Others tried to rescue the wounded. Fires spread. Explosions echoed through the hull. As the ship began to sink, her captain, Hector Bonzo, gave the order to abandon ship. But for many, it was already too late. Within 30 minutes, the ship was gone. 1,000 men were now adrift in the freezing sea. What followed was a second ordeal, one just as deadly as the sinking itself. The South Atlantic is not forgiving. The waters were barely above freezing, waves were high, and night was falling. Survivors clung to life rafts, some overcrowded, others half sunk. Hypothermia set in quickly. Men cried out for their mothers, for God, for someone, anyone, to find them. But rescue was hours away. It wasn't until the next morning that Argentine helicopters and ships reached the site. By then, more than 320 men were dead. Some were lost in the explosion. Others drowned. Many died from exposure. It was the single deadliest incident of the Falklands War. The news shocked the world. Argentina accused Britain of a war crime, arguing that the Belgrano had been retreating and posed no threat. Massive protests erupted in Buenos Aires. Families mourned sons and brothers they would never see again. In Britain, public reaction was mixed. Some saw it as a necessary act of war. Others called it murder. Margaret Thatcher, when asked years later if she regretted the sinking, replied firmly, "No, it was a necessary action to ensure the success of the task force and to save lives." But that didn't stop the questions, or the anger, or the grief. The sinking of the Belgrano had profound consequences. The Argentine Navy, stunned by the loss, pulled its remaining ships back to port. They would not venture out again for the rest of the war. That meant British forces could land troops on the Falklands with less fear of naval attack. Strategically, the sinking gave Britain the upper hand, but morally and politically, it remained a scar. In Argentina, the government, already unpopular, lost even more support. The military junta that had ruled the country with an iron fist for years would collapse soon after the war. And for the families of the Belgrano crew, the pain never went away. Captain Hector Bonzo survived the sinking. He would spend the rest of his life honoring the memory of his fallen men, attending ceremonies, comforting families, and defending their service. He never blamed the British directly. "It was war," he said. "We were soldiers." But he also believed the loss was avoidable. In the decades since, the wreck of the Belgrano has become a tomb. It lies more than 4,000 meters below the sea, southeast of the Falklands, untouched, silent, a reminder of the cost of war, not just in strategy and politics, but in lives. The men who died that day were mostly young. Many were conscripts. Few expected to see combat. Fewer still imagined they'd meet their end in icy water, thousands of miles from home. Their names are etched on memorials in Argentina. Their stories live on in letters, journals, and in the memories of the men who survived. And in the ocean, their ship remains, silent beneath the waves. Thank you for listening to Last Post History. Subscribe for more true stories from the world at war.